How's it going out there? Welcome to Stock Talk with Mike. Today I want to talk to you about one of the leading fintech players that's disrupting big banks, and that's Square. I want to talk about their Cash App, the digital wallet, and compare it to its closest rival, which is PayPal's Venmo, and also talk to you about the recent venture into Bitcoin and what it means to their prospects moving forward, as well as what major money managers currently think about Square. So if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. All right, so Square basically has two types of customers. They have millions of small business merchants that basically use Square's entire financial ecosystem for things like their point of sale devices. So think those chip readers for payment card readers, as well as invoicing, record keeping, small business loans, and even website building. Square really tailors to sort of those vendors that are forward-facing or customer-facing, so brick and mortar stores, restaurants, or vendors at festivals all use Square, fairs, those sort of thing. Whereas you think of a company like Shopify, they more tailor to more just pure online stores. So I would consider Shopify also a competitor, but they really sort of operate in a bit of a different market where Square's bread and butter is more the forward-facing small business owners. Square also has tens of millions of customers that use their digital wallet, the Cash App. So the Cash App is used for peer-to-peer transfer of funds, for payments. You even use it now to buy Bitcoin and even fractional shares of stocks. I think the digital wallet component of both Square and PayPal's business is going to be really important growth drivers over the next decade or more. So I'm paying really close attention to that component of their business. And honestly, I think both companies are great, and they're both going to destroy the market, I feel like, over any long period of time. But I do like Square's Cash App more than PayPal's Venmo from what I'm seeing. Some Google trends too. There's more interest as of late in the Cash App over PayPal's Venmo. This is a 5-year chart, and the blue line represents searches for the Cash App. And you can see recently here, early 2020, the Cash App just shot up. And that was, I think, when they introduced stock trading and Bitcoin trading on their platform. I also like about Square in general and their Cash App is that they have seem to be the leader on the innovation front. And it seems like, at least on the digital wallet side, that PayPal has been kind of like following behind in Square's footsteps. So I kind of like the front runner innovative company here, and that's Square and the Cash App. The Cash App has finally just passed Venmo as far as active monthly users. Just the number of users is just skyrocketing. And it's over 40 million active monthly users for the Cash App now, compared to closer to 30 for Venmo. You have to pay attention to, you might see higher numbers, but I think like PayPal also reports out on active users, and to be an active user, you just have to use the platform in a year, and that number is substantially higher. There's actually two parts to the Bitcoin story with Square. One is that you can now actually buy and sell Bitcoin on the Cash App. And every time you do one of those transactions, they're collecting roughly a 2% fee on that transaction. And that showed up in a big way in their last quarterly report, their Q3, as far as massive inflows of revenue. And granted, it's only 2%, but when we're talking massive increase in revenue to their balance sheet, it can actually really start to impact their bottom line. The other side of the Bitcoin story is back in October of 2020, Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Square, announced that on October 7th, they actually purchased 4,709 Bitcoins using cash that was sitting on their balance sheet. And they bought them for $10,618 each, which works out to about $53.91 million. So that represents about 1% of their assets. And when I heard about that, I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of buzz around this, but I'm like 1%, it's not really gonna be a big move the needle for them. Like if Bitcoin dropped 50% tomorrow, their assets would only drop 0.5%. Not a real game changer for me as far as like why I would own the company, for example. But interestingly, I mean, at the price they bought at over the last quarter, that 50 million has grown to over 150 million. So that's pretty incredible when you think about their net income last quarter was 37 million. Well, they have paper gains in Bitcoin sitting there right now, about 100 million over this next quarter they're going to report. So it's going to be really interesting to see how what analysts make of that, because it's kind of uncharted territory. In a way, that trade has really paid off. Again, it's only paper gains at this point, but it'll be interesting to see. And I think ultimately, if we saw a big crash in Bitcoin and you saw Square sell off, because I think there's a bit of a correlation now with some people playing it as a bit of a Bitcoin trade, I think that might be a bit of a buying opportunity. And here's why. This analyst, Dan Dolev with Mizuho, actually determined, looking at some historical data, found out that Square actually tends to make money on Bitcoin whether the price is going up or if it's going down. So that's something to keep in mind, because most of the revenue from Bitcoin is going to come from that transaction volume. So reading here, Square Bitcoin revenue should grow irrespective of Bitcoin price levels. He says, we estimate that if Bitcoin reaches 100,000 by year end, this could drive 9x growth in Bitcoin gross profits. So that's something to keep in mind. However, if Bitcoin dropped to 10,000 in gross profit, it may still double. So obviously not as profitable, but nonetheless, still an increase, even if Bitcoin sort of tanked from here. And that's helped by their growing user base and higher engagement. Because, right, even if Bitcoin's going down, people are still going to be buying. And you could even argue that there might even be more transactions if it's highly volatile. Examples he ran through. Bitcoin average quarterly price dropped roughly from 10,600 to 3,800 from Q1 2018 to Q1 2019. So a massive drop. And during that period, Cash App Bitcoin gross profit quadrupled from basically 0.2 million to 0.8 million. And gross profit per user doubled to 500,000. And then he used another example, Q3 2019 to Q1 20, Bitcoin average price declined from, not as much, but from 10,400 down to 8,300. And gross profit from Bitcoin increased more than threefold, from 2.1 million to 6.7 million, while gross profit per user grew from 0.4 million to 1.2. So keep that in mind. If Bitcoin tanks and Square drops, it might be a real buying opportunity, because it might not really negatively impact the bottom line. Yes, they have Bitcoin sitting on their balance sheet, but it's still a relatively small portion of their assets, and I don't think I'd be overly concerned about that. All right, so just looking at their Q3, it was really a remarkable quarter, and revenues look like off the charts, but a lot of that has to do with revenue from Bitcoin. So when someone buys Bitcoin on the Cash App, that amount of Bitcoin shows up on the revenue line. And then what you see is an expense of about 98% offsetting that revenue. So they did have Bitcoin 19 as well, but it's just really taken off. So it really seemed to skew the revenue number. So they reported on the quarter 3.03 billion in net revenue, and that was 140% year-over-year increase in revenue. You just love to see that. But even if you take out Bitcoin altogether, it's still up about 25% year-over-year increase. And then you look above at the top chart here, gross profit was still $794 million, and that's up 59% year over year. And that's despite the fact that over 2019, they actually have sold their Caviar ecosystem, which is that restaurant payment system. And they break that down into Seller and the Cash App. And the far right here, the Cash App, generated $385 million in gross profit, and that's a 212% year-over-year increase in gross profit. So clearly the Cash App isn't just benefiting from these Bitcoin transactions at about a 2% margin. In general, it's growing. And I think what happens is you have this influx of people using the Cash App for buying stocks, for Bitcoin, then they're doing other activities on the Cash App. They're also holding money on the Cash App, which also generates revenue for Square as well. So, but that Cash App revenue is just, gross profits just exploding. 212% year over year is pretty incredible. So it's nearly actually as big now as their seller gross profit, which was $409 million on the quarter, which was only a 12% year over year increase. But I actually think that's really good, because given that we're in this pandemic and these merchants are really like customer facing, and these are really small business owners. These are vendors at festivals. They're restaurants. They're the most heavily impacted small businesses that you could imagine. And they actually still saw a 12% year-over-year increase. So I think it actually speaks to the resilience of their business. And I think that that number will majorly accelerate coming out the other side of our economic recovery. And their net income, bottom right, was $37 million on the quarter. So they were positive for the first quarter since Q4 of 2019. So that's always great to see. Just a couple pieces that are really icing on the cake, I think, as far as my conviction for Square. And one is ARK Invest. So they were one of the best performing actively managed ETFs, their ARK Innovation Fund last year with over 170% return. They now manage over 17 billion in funds in that ETF. But they are really, really big believers in Square. It's actually one of their largest holdings. It may be their second largest behind Tesla. In their fintech innovation ETF, their ARK-F, it's actually by their largest holding by far. So almost 9% weight in their portfolio, whereas payment competitor, gotta be PayPal, is actually their 8th largest holding at under a 4% weighting. So that's quite interesting. Also in their flagship fund, their innovation ETF, the ARK-K, it's the 5th largest fund in there, almost 5% of the portfolio. And in their next generation internet ETF, ARK-W, it's their 4th largest fund with almost a 4% weighting. Also, they have a $375 price target on Square by 2025, and they have quite a detailed valuation model they have to get there. And they have revenues growing to 50 billion by 2025. So that's pretty remarkable. Currently revenues are still shy of, most likely here in 2020, once we hit Q4, are probably going to be shy of $10 billion. So that's a 5x in revenues from here. So that definitely helps add to my conviction. Another thing good to look at always, either in companies you hold or also prospective companies you're looking at buying, is looking at money managers buying and selling. So they do that through the required 13F filings quarterly. And looking at a roll-up summary here for Square, that in Q3, actually the number of funds holding Square went up to 955, up from 836. And there was 203 new positions and 312 firms increased their positions. So between the new and increase, that's 515. And then 71 closed positions and 340 reduced positions. You add up the closed and reduced here in red, I got 411. So there's more new positions and increases than there is closed and reduced. And I find that extremely bullish, given that in that quarter, Square also went on a massive run. So despite the fact that the share price appreciated, funds were still buying the stock. So I find that interesting. They weren't ringing the register, taking profits. Insider buys and sells. So what are people within the company doing? What's Jack Dorsey doing? Is he selling his shares? Is he buying shares? Now, I put a few things on here. The red line actually indicates the line between which more insiders are buying versus selling. And you can see here the bottom, this chart goes from the beginning of 2020 till now. And for the most part, there's been more selling than buying as it falls below that red line. The only time there was more buying than selling was back in March when the share price tanked down to $32 a share at its lowest. And now it's trading at $225. But after that, there's been more sells than buys. But honestly, I don't actually read too much into sells. Be careful with sells. I guess it's interesting and something to keep an eye on. Maybe if insiders sold all their shares or is really aggressively selling shares. But honestly, there's a million reasons why you could sell shares and want to get paid. But there's only really one reason to buy, and that's to make money. So I would take that as a really bullish sign back in March when they're buying up, massively buying up shares, that their stock price is undervalued. But when you see sells, it's really difficult to read too much into it. Because think about it, if you were Jack Dorsey and you're the CEO of Square, you have almost all your wealth tied up in that company, right? No matter how much conviction you have, it makes sense to sell some shares. You think about that, having a portfolio of stocks, no matter how high your conviction is, you're not putting all your money into one company. Analysts' revenue estimates for the full year 2020, Q4 is going to be reported soon. For the full year, they're estimating revenue growth of 313.8% for 2020. So just crazy revenue growth. And then a measly 38.8% for 2021. Still big growth off a massive base from 2020, obviously. And really interesting here is looking at the earnings history. Look at the last 2 quarters of 2020 here. An earnings surprise of 460% to the upside in Q2, and in Q3, 112.5% earnings surprise to the upside. So just incredible beats, and that's why we've seen the share price just skyrocket. So definitely like to see that trend to continue. The 5-year chart is Square. So it's really been quite a ride. I've been an investor in Square since summer of 2017 and originally bought for around $25 a share. I have traded around that position a little bit, but I've always held a pretty significant position in Square. And, originally after buying it, it did quite well, getting up to close to $100 a share back in late 2018. And then it was followed by about 18 months of sideways or to slight down and a lot of negative analyst calls and whatnot with Square. And a lot of reasons to sell, honestly, but I still saw a vision for the long-term growth in this company, and I still do today. So when I saw that large sell-off there in March, this was one of the ones on my list that I actually bought more of. I didn't catch the low, but I bought more around 60 some odd dollars a share. And I have trimmed a little bit on the ride up here back in 2020, I'm not going to lie. And honestly, I trimmed too early. It just kept going up. But I'm maintaining about a 5% weight of Square in my portfolio. And if I see a significant pullback of 20% or more, I will be looking to load up more to kind of maintain that weighting in my portfolio. I plan on holding Square for the long term. And that's the way I like to handle these companies. If I have a position, they do a massive run up like the Square where we've seen 300% in 2020. I don't sell all my position. I trim a little and maintain a certain weight in my portfolio. And if I'm looking at Square as a company I like and I wasn't in it, I don't try and wait for that valuation to come in. I generally try and buy a quarter of a position, or try to at least. And then if it comes down, I'll load up more. And if it doesn't, at least I'm into the company and I'll enjoy that appreciation. I really do believe in Square in the long term. So that's about all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy investing.